Okay, so in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 3 specialty nib grinds that I got done at the Arkansas Pen Show by Matthew Chen. The pens that I'm going to be showing are the Newton Eastman. That is a pen I've had for many years, and it's got a Matthew Chen nib ground as an architect. You can see Matthew's logo on there. So this was just the nib that I screwed into this pen after I had it ground. He ground it on his own handle and then I tested it, thought it was good, and then he gave that to me and I was able to swap it into the Eastman. The Shawn Newton Prospector, and I'm trying this with this 2-camera view so I can kind of inset them so you can see a close-up as we're doing the writing. And on this one has, Shawn's nib with his logo on it. And then this has Matthew's Kodachi nib ground onto it. And then the third pen that I will be showing is the Magnolia Pen Company Jackson model. Get that on the overhead and up close. You can see the Magnolia Pen Company on the finial. And then this is just a plain black Yovo nib that has Matthew Chen's Uranagi grind on it. And since this is a coated nib, you can actually see on the tipping material there in the close-up where, if you have a coated nib and you get it ground, it will take a little bit of that finish off. So just something to be aware of, if that's something that matters to you, you might want to start with just a, silver nib so that you don't see that color variation. But I knew that going in, so I liked the look of the black nib on this lunar landing material, so that was good for that. So let me start with the Architect. Now, the ink that is in this is Ackerman Dutch Masters Vermeer, so it's kind of a burgundy. And an Architect grind is, in general, thinner lines down, wider lines across. So, let's see. And you see it most on the crosshatch. If you do a thin line down, and then you can see it's a wider line over. Let me get that up here. Hopefully that is focusing there. My little screen, so let me make sure I get it on this camera here. So you can see that has a thicker line across. Now, in my case, since I write small, I had him start this with a medium nib and ground it down because that matches better with my writing. But you can get it started with a broad, and you can get, it's really, that was one thing that I had never experienced a nib grind before. This is my first time getting him ground. But Matthew would grind it some and then hand it to you and let you test it. And you could say, you know what, I want a little thinner. No, that's good. So it's an interactive process. It's not just a, here's your nib, have a good day. I really like that because then you can truly get it customized to you. And, I also saw him sitting and asking someone to write some so he could see the angle that the pen was at. And even on my Uranagi, he wanted to see how I hold the pen to the paper so that he can customize that grind to, how you're going to write. So the Architect, if you write, more up and down, you can get an even thinner line. But because of the way the grind is, and I'll try and get a macro shot of this as well. I don't think this is going to focus. Oh, it might there. So you can see there's that little kind of angled up. So if you hold it straight up and down and you do that crosshatch, you don't have that tipping material. So then it's just essentially like an extra fine, if you're writing straight up and down. So an Architect, I write it with about a 45-degree pen angle. That's what it's really meant for in this case, to get those thinner downstrokes. And I plan to use this for videos as well as, something like writing in a heading. And since I write in caps, it should show pretty well, like even on the, the name of the, writing out Matthew's name there, you can see that variation. And different people's handwritings will show this more. So that's just something, this was for how I intend to use this nib. I really liked how it worked out. So that's the Architect, and that's kind of a standard nib. It's done by Matthew, but an Architect is just a general style that any nibmeister is going to have their way that they do it. So it's not, something that only they would do or something like that. So up next, let me do the Magnolia Pen Company, and this is the Uranagi. So on the Uranagi grind, when you're doing your normal writing, it's going to be a thinner, sharp line. So and I don't know if the microphone's picking that up, but on this, I had it pretty sharp so you can hear it. You can hear it kind of scratching on the paper, which I tend to like. Not everybody likes that. So once again, personalized to how I plan on using it. Now, the Uranagi is also meant to be like a completely different nib if you write on reverse. So let's do some crosshatches first, and then I'll do the reverse and show how it's different. So you essentially, in a way, get two nibs in one. So you can see that is a pretty kind of standard crosshatch, and this is on the Clyde 2mm grid paper. I didn't mention that initially, but that's kind of a standard, crosshatch that you would expect. And this one, if you angle your pen even more, you don't really get any kind of different variation. So you can actually see it doesn't write as well if I don't hold the pen like I normally do. It kind of writes in a different manner. So that's why he was really wanting to know the angle so that he can tune the grind to that. Now, on the Uranagi, when you write in the reverse, it writes with a thicker line. And it's actually smoother too. You don't hear it the same way you do as the nib in the correct orientation or the standard orientation. So when you do the lines here, it is a thicker line. So it's kind of a, very extra fine line on the front. And then I would call this almost a medium for how I write. And the ink flows on both sides of the nib, when he tunes it. So you can see the difference there of the line thickness between each side. It's a little bit softer of a line when you write with the reverse, and it spreads out. It shows a little bit more of the shading on this Sailor Manyo Uri ink. So that's, I anticipate using the normal side of the nib most of the time on this, but it is nice, if you're kind of coloring in or, once again, doing headings. Really depends on how you're going to use it. I've already written a few pages of, journal in this. I tried a little bit on the reverse, and it's a nice experience, but I mainly got this for the normal side. And then the third nib, and I would say the Uranagi and the Kodachi are the two kind of specialty nibs. And I'll put a note or a link to Matthew's website in the description. He kind of talks about these are nibs that he got permission to do grinds on. He did not come up with these. This was a kind of a historical grind that I think it was Nagahara. Let me go look real quick. Since I have the computer here, just to be sure I'm saying the correct. And his website is Matt's Nibworks, and he talks about he'll accept nibs to be sent in. It's the Nagahara specialty grinds. He does the Kodachi, the Uranagi, the Feud or Fude. I don't really know exactly. That's different pronunciations. I've heard both ways. And then the Beak Point. I almost got a Beak Point because it's really unique. And I'll put a link to the website, kind of showing that, and maybe pop up a picture here when I'm talking through this to show what I mean there. The beak, it literally looks like a broken nib. It's curves down in a very severe. I got to use his testing nib, but it's really cool. And then on the reverse, it functions as a feud or fude nib, so it's very neat. So back to what we're doing here. We've got the Uranagi. Let me get my screen up so I can make sure I'm showing this. And this is not the Uranagi, this is the Kodachi. Okay, so the way this nib is meant to function is it's very angle dependent. If you write, and this originally started as to emulate brush strokes, since that's how writing was done. If you do a high angle, you're going to get a very fine line. The lower angle you go, the fatter the line is. Just do some cross hatches here. We'll do normal. High point. Then I'll call this low. For me, that's holding the pen further back than I normally would. So let me hold this here to kind of show all of that together. So you can see how that line variation is depending on the angle in which you're holding it. So that's a very, unique, and it does kind of emulate like a brush. I've recently gotten into starting to teach myself watercolor painting, and the angle of the brush really applies there. So I can see how that, emulates that in this writing. And then the other thing that I asked Matthew about, because the reverse writing is really popular, he was able to kind of round out the reverse side of mine, so it almost functions as a needle point. Now, with this particular ink I have in here, you're not going to get that to focus there. You're not going to get a deep line, but if you had a darker ink in here, that needle point would really, write as you'd expect. The ink I have in here, by the way, is the Fresh as a Daisy by Vanessa that they made for the Arkansas Pen Show. And then I believe I mentioned in the Architect was the Ackerman Dutch Masters Vermeer. And then in the Magnolia Pen Company was the Sailor Manyo Uri. So that's kind of covers the main three grinds that I got done. Now, between Beth and I, we did get quite a few other pins tuned or sized down. And, it is still getting a nib grind, but it's not a specialty grind per se. It's kind of a standard, option from when you're getting a nib ground. So it's just something to be aware of, that if you get a pin and you try it and you end up not liking it, you're not using it, I can definitely say now with confidence, look into getting a grind if you go to a show, or some nibmeisters will go to different shops. They'll have like a pop-up where you can go see, Matthew might be at this store for this weekend, where you could go in and get a grind done, or, I believe some of the other like Kirk Spear I've seen on Instagram. And so different nib, look at your local shops, see who's going to be there. And then at pen shows, nib appointments for especially the bigger shows, they'll go up in advance and those sell out really quickly. In Matthew's case at the Arkansas show, it was kind of a walk up because it is a smaller show. And he was just doing cost per grind. It wasn't really booking a set amount of time. It was, this grind cost this much, and he has prices listed on his website if you were going to send in. And, he had his price sheet at the show, so you knew what you're getting into, and it listed, this a tune is this, these grinds are this, and then the specialty grinds are this. So it is a cost scale. So just so you know that going in, that not all grinds are going to cost the same. Every nib grinder is going to have their own pricing, structure and point. So just something to be aware of. And so that covers the main three. And have you had nibs ground? Are you new to it? I was excited for this. This is one of the things I was looking forward to the most about going to Arkansas was actually finally getting some nibs ground. Some of the pins that I've done videos on, especially like the Anoto, and it wrote okay, but I couldn't sit down and use it in my normal writing. And now that I got it sized down, I've already written a few pages with it. So that was a nice. Let me go on the show just because I do have that in a video. Let me grab these couple, and I'll just do not the same kind of writing sample, but just to show. This Anoto started as and I'll see if I can find a good clip from the previous video and kind of put them side by side. But this is now. I can write within the 2mm grid, which I could not do before. And, that's one thing in talking to Matthew. He was looking, this is an 18 karat nib, so he, you don't want to do certain grinds on certain nibs. So that is something, too, that, you want to talk to the person who's doing the grind, let them know how you plan to use it. And, there's a good chance they might say, you really shouldn't do that, or, I'd like to do this grind for you, but you're going to need to start with a different nib, because like a stub nib doesn't have enough tipping material to do some of these grinds. So you might, and that's where he had Yovo nibs where he could start with one of his, or like as I was buying my Newton pen and buying my Magnolia, since I knew I was getting grinds, I talked to Matthew first saying, hey, I want a Kodachi on this Newton Prospector. What size nib should I start with? And he had his samples, and then Chad from Eel and Anchor has a bunch of different Matthews grinds, starting with different nib sizes, so I was able to try some of his pins to kind of go in knowing that I wanted this to start with a medium, and then this one actually was best to start with a broad nib for how it was going down. So just little things like that come into play with getting them ground. But you can see on that, let me hold this up there, that is a much finer line on that Anoto now. And it wasn't drastic. It was just enough, though. And then I just did the video on the titanium nib. And this is when I didn't get it sized down. I just got it tuned. So in that video, I just, inked it and hadn't really had a chance to use it. And after I tried after that, it was hard starting. And it was just not writing well. So this is the... And this is Iroshizuku Tsukio in this one, and it writes pretty dark, but I'm able to do, the small writing like I'm used to in these lines. So, getting a nib tuned if it's not working well, just another option, especially because if you have the pins, you're going to want to use them. And a lot of these pins, like all the ones I got tuned were either new and I wanted to use them more, but I didn't like how they were writing, or they're pins that I really liked when I got them, had them for a long time, but I wasn't using them because they didn't write, in my preferred manner. So all that being said, look into getting nib grinds if you have the opportunity. I would highly recommend it. Now that I've had this done, I want to get some similar grinds from other nib grinders. As I said, they all grind them a little bit differently. A lot of them have their own custom grind, their own take on grinds, and even you can really see that with like Esterbrook. They offer the different specialty nib grinds from certain people like Kirk Spear, Gino Solano, I think it's JJ Laux. So, different things like that. So getting a nib ground is becoming more prevalent in the fountain pen community. So definitely look into that if you have the chance, or, if you don't have someone local, you can order a lot of these specialty grinds kind of done in a generic manner through the nibmeister's websites, and then you might be able to get it tweaked later on if it needs a little bit more, or your writing style changes, or you have a different use case. So If you have any questions about, my experience of getting this done for the first time, feel free to ask in the comments. I'm really excited to use all of these pens now. It's really opened up my, it's fighting for, my normal pen cases are going to be fighting for space a little bit more than they were in the past, because I have a lot more options now that I wasn't going to be carrying around on a regular basis in the past. Don't forget, I now have the code DWRD you can use at Vaness to get 10% off your purchases. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing so you can see new videos as they're released. And thanks for watching.